Have you heard him before? This speaker who everyone is talking about. Jesus from Nazareth. I wondered really what all the fuss was about. Why all the excitement? I mean, preachers come and go, some better than others, yet when I stood on the outskirts one time, I had to admit it really was quite remarkable. I'd heard of his healings, and even that he'd got rid of demons from some, so I wasn't quite sure what to expect. I guess I was a bit curious, so I decided to go and see for myself. As I went, curiosity turned to anticipation. What great wonder might I see today? And then, as I thought a bit more about it, to nerves. What if he called me out and required something of me? Would I be able? Would I be embarrassed? We've all got our own issues to face, but what if he didn't? Would I be disappointed? All this pondering, and I still don't really know how I felt when I reached the edge of the crowd gathered by the shore of the lake. And then, to be honest with you, immediately I felt let down. There's so many of us that we can barely hear the guy from the edges. So of course we're all pushing and shoving in to get closer, knocking into each other, frustrating one another, and none of that is helping us to hear. I'm thinking maybe I'll leave and try again another day, but it turns out that Jesus realised that it wasn't so easy to hear him, because after a chat with the fishermen who were washing their nets on the shore, he gets into one of their boats and they push him out a little. So much better. The natural acoustics created by the environment made such a difference. It kind of makes you wonder at these little gifts of creation and natural amphitheatre. Clever, really, of Jesus to use what was around him, both the nature and the boat. And so interesting to hear him talk. He really does seem to have a new perspective on things. And the way he uses stories to help us think about things. Not that I always understand, mind you. It's kind of, though, quite easy to relate to the way he speaks, and he really seems to want to tell us about what God and his kingdom is like. And he kind of tells it in a way that makes it seem inviting and possible. And you start to get this feeling that he knows you and what you're thinking. Sometimes, just when a question pops into your head, he says something that connects. Well, he finished speaking, and we were all wondering whether to move on or whether to follow him to where he went next, when we see him having a conversation with Simon. Now, everyone around here knows Simon. Bit loud, says what he thinks, but hard-working, one of the local fishermen. Of course, Simon must have met him before, because we'd all heard about his mother-in-law being healed from her fever. Well, she was so thankful and excited. She really couldn't help herself, showing abundant hospitality. In fact, everyone who then showed up to see Jesus and asked for healing got an extra bonus of her cooking. We all heard about it. I guess that's how it is. No secrets around here. I was disappointed not to be there that day, as she's well known for her cooking. It was remarkable, really. I hear she could barely lift her head one minute, and the next she's running around baking, cooking and feeding everyone. That's just one of the things I heard that made me want to check him out for myself. So Simon knew Jesus and knew what he could do, so we were kind of curious about where this conversation would lead. Well, you could tell from Simon's face that he was a bit indignant. And when we heard what Jesus said to him, you could kind of see where he was coming from. This Jesus, yes, his teachings were remarkable and his deeds even more so. But he was no fisherman. In fact, I heard tell he was a carpenter by trade. But he asked Simon to cast his net the other side of the boat. Well, I'm no fisherman either, but everyone knows that you're more likely to catch fish around here at night. I mean, why do you think they're all out there each night? Fishing has been in their families for generations. They know what they're doing. And also by the shore. I mean, really, you'd want to be further out to try and catch something. Wouldn't be such a hard job, would it, otherwise? And we'd all be doing it. If he'd tried to tell me how to run my business, I'd kind of have told him where to go. I wouldn't now, though. Simon's response made sense, though I did think he was more polite than I'd expected. "Master, we've worked hard all night long and caught nothing. Read there, we're exhausted from our efforts, and what on earth do you know about it?" And that's still the polite version. But the next bit caught me by surprise. "Yet if you say so, I will let down the nets." Simon's not usually one for doing as somebody asked. Maybe something of this Jesus is rubbing off on him. And I'm so glad he listened. I've never seen anything like it. So many fish. They had to call the other nearby fishermen to help haul them all in. I'm sure the nets nearly broke and the boat was close to tipping over from the weight of it all. I mean, nets are heavy enough to haul in, even with a fair catch, given that they all have these weights on the bottom to sink them low into the water. They were heaving and pulling, laughing and grunting. There was much astonishment, noise and hilarity from the fishermen and crowd alike, and Jesus kind of seemed quite delighted with it all too. Not to be crude about it, but that would have been quite a huge boost to their business. They could probably have expanded and taken on some more men or bought an extra boat. So what happened next was equally surprising. Once they'd managed to deal with hauling the nets in, I think the awe and wonder hit home. I never thought I'd see the day when Simon was down on his knees for anyone. He's calling Jesus Lord, for one. I mean, who does Simon think Jesus is? God himself? Yeah, I have to kind of admit that was pretty miraculous, so maybe you have to wonder. And Simon is telling Jesus how sinful he is and to keep away from him. Well, I guess if you think you've seen someone from God that close up, you'd be worried that you wouldn't measure up, that you'd be condemned, judged. I'm not sure now that I'd like to be that close to the front and all these happenings, that Jesus might start asking too many questions of me. Jesus doesn't send him away, though. He just smiles, tells him not to be afraid, and that he can go with Jesus and catch people instead. Well, I'm not quite sure about what that meant, and it didn't really look like Simon did either, but nevertheless, him, his brother, and the other fishermen they always work with, dragged their boats to shore, got friends and family to deal with this huge catch of fish, and blow me, they follow on after Jesus. They're still following him now, in different towns and villages around the area. When they come back, I'd love to see what's been going on. You hear rumours, more healings, others joining them. I can't forget what happened. It does make you wonder. I'd like to know more about what it's like following him. And maybe one day. In the many times that I've read this passage over the years, I've always imagined it that when Jesus calls the disciples, these and others, that it's their first time of encountering him. I don't know why I assumed that. Imagining myself into a scene is not something I do very naturally, and I'm often helped by reading novels based in biblical times, or more recently by watching something called The Chosen, an American-produced TV show with multiple seasons which follows the life of Jesus. It's a beautiful interpretation. It's not on regular TV, but you can download an app to watch it, and thanks, Andrea, for the recommendation. Lots of these things have helped me to realise that more often when we read of someone's encounter with Jesus, it's not necessarily the first time they've met him, though obviously sometimes, of course, it will be. But usually a series of encounters leading up to a decision point. I guess it doesn't matter whether Simon has encountered Jesus before, but it kind of made me feel more normal, not seeing or hearing about Jesus once and making an immediate life-changing decision, but actually a series of encounters which led to decision. Last week, Daniel reminded us about the 3 words that we're passionate about as a church, that we long to enable all people to encounter Jesus, to follow Jesus, and to share Jesus with others. Encounter, follow and share. And for me, this account models all three of these so well and leads us to some questions to consider where we are with Jesus. So firstly, encounter. Simon had a remarkable encounter with Jesus. It wasn't his first encounter. His previous encounter had been pretty remarkable, and that didn't cause him to drop everything. I think the reality is that he had probably had several encounters where he'd become curious, he'd wanted to find out more, possibly even wanted to back off. And then today, where we see that he's experienced enough to want to trust even when he doesn't understand. At this point in his journey of faith in Jesus, he reaches a decision point. When Simon encounters Jesus in this really powerful way, he recognises Jesus as Lord. It's not the full confession of faith that we see later on in Luke's Gospel, but it's the starting point. That point that leads him to follow, that point that leads to a significant change for him. For Simon, encountering Jesus puts things and himself into perspective. In seeing Jesus' godly nature, Simon can also see his own weaknesses, failures, insecurities, and recognises that he doesn't measure up. We can all see that for ourselves too. But the good news is that Jesus doesn't look at Simon and say, yes, you're a nightmare, best keep your distance. Jesus knows all about Simon and us too. And he tells Simon not to be afraid and invites him into relationship and into partnership in kingdom business. Jesus says the same to us too. He knows all about us, more even than we know ourselves, and he welcomes us to live with him and work with him too. So our first question is, when we encounter Jesus, what will our response be? Will we edge away, worried that we don't measure up? Or will we embrace the invitation to follow him? To follow involves a step of faith. You know, if Simon could have watched first the movie of how his life with Jesus would turn out, both the great and the challenging, what would he have made of it all? Would he have taken that step, or would he have stayed at home? But he didn't, and we don't get that option. We need to live it out, and as our relationship with Jesus grows, so our faith and trust grow with it. I'm not going to pretend it's easy. It often isn't. But I think it's so much better than life without Jesus. And this leads to our next question. Do we allow following Jesus to transform us radically? It was quite radical for Simon to leave everything and follow Jesus, especially after that big catch of fish, might have led to alternative opportunities. Who knows where his fishing business might have gone, or it might have paid off some debts and helped him and his family get on their feet. But he saw in Jesus his ability to provide, that by following Jesus, he wouldn't need to worry about all that Jesus was more than capable. If we follow Simon's story through the gospel, and I really hope that you're able to be reading the gospel daily with us at the moment, we see someone who became more and more vulnerable with Jesus and allowed Jesus to transform him, to grow him and to use him. In fact, the only reason we can even read about this account is that Simon and the others were willing to follow Jesus and even give their lives for the sharing of the gospel. If they hadn't, we wouldn't have heard of it ourselves. I'm recording this message as I'm stuck at home having tested positive. Someone said to me yesterday, "That's a curveball I didn't see coming." And I love that phrase, curveball, because I bet for Simon, his call from Jesus was a curveball. He'd grown up expecting to follow in the family fishing business, and he'd been, up until that day, doing exactly that. Following Jesus does include curveballs when he calls us into the unexpected. Will we resist them or go with him in trust? But he doesn't call us all to change jobs. We heard at our carol service last month from Andy about following Jesus as he drives buses. We can follow him in whatever we do, in business, in media, politics, hospitality, entertainment businesses, caring professions, education, medicine, in our homes and with our families, and in the community settings that we enjoy. Lydia, who we meet in the book of Acts, which was also written by Luke, it's his follow-on book. Lydia follows Jesus while running her purple cloth business. Now, purple cloth was a high-end product, to use Lord Sugar's terminology from The Apprentice, and she uses her wealth to show hospitality to Paul and his companions, and also to further the work of spreading the good news of Jesus. Jesus calls Lydia to follow him and to used her in the setting that she already was. So what does Jesus' call for you look like in practical terms? And this leads us on to looking at sharing Jesus with others, because that was the invitation for Simon right at the end of this passage, an invitation to catch people, to share Jesus. There's a lovely metaphor in this account through the use of the nets that were used to catch fish. This was not line fishing, where a line is cast and we just wait around for one fish to bite. This was net fishing. It's labour intensive. Much strain over long hours was spent casting the nets, allowing it to sink as the weights that were attached did their jobs. And then some heavy hauling work to pull up even an empty net due to the weights, but even more so if there was a catch in it. There was often a lot of effort for little results. It required work and commitment. Have you ever talked to someone about Jesus? Did they all come running at once? Were you really encouraged and overwhelmed? Considering the nets turns this miracle into a metaphor for mission, because most likely they didn't all come running at once. It's a lot of hard work. We often think how odd it was that Jesus called fishermen into such a different calling, but perhaps it was exactly their skills that Jesus was after. Their commitment, their perseverance, their willingness for hard work. The difference in their catch of fish in this story on that day was that they listened to where Jesus told them to cast the net and then obeyed. So are we prepared for the hard work of sharing the gospel with those who Jesus asks us to? Are we willing to keep going even when we feel discouraged? This account encourages me to persevere, but also to ask the question, where are we casting our net? Who are we sharing Jesus with? And are we even inviting him to show us where he wants us to share? This is real kingdom work. So to end, I guess I'd love us to reflect more on this account. We can do that now, but also at home over the week, to consider, where do we find ourselves in this story? Do we relate to Simon or one of the other fishermen? Are we at the front of the crowd, or perhaps hovering at the edges, or maybe even holding back from following? Once we recognise where we are, perhaps we can ask Jesus, where would he like us to be? Do we need to make a first step in following Jesus, or make a fresh commitment? If you want to know more, I can really recommend the Alpha course starting next week as a good way to do that. And please speak to anybody here if you want to find out more about that. And if you'd like to make a fresh commitment, please speak to Philip or one of the other people around you about how to do that. And the prayer team will be available after the service as well, if you'd like to make a prayer about that with somebody. But also, if we've begun following, are we allowing ongoing encounter with Jesus to continue to transform us in the way he would like? And finally, are we joining in with the invitation to partner with Jesus in sharing, in catching people to build the kingdom? Where is he asking us to cast our net? So Lord, I just pray that your Spirit would speak to our hearts and answer. You would send your quiet whisper of answer to these questions, especially the ones that are spoken to us today. And although I'm not with you, can I encourage you to continue to pray and listen now in this moment? God bless.